Mushroom risotto. Tasty, cheesy, earthy, and not actually that hard to make. I don't really need to say any more, do I? Let's get started.
I'll begin with the mushrooms. Here I have cremini or chestnut mushrooms on the left, shiitake in the middle, and oyster mushrooms to the right. With the shiitake, I'm taking off the bottom of the stalk. This is where most of the dirt is and can be a little chewy as well. Also, I'm brushing off any clumps of dirt that I can see. We are not going to waste anything, so have a container next to you for all the trim. With the cremini or chestnut mushrooms, I am just going to pull off the stalk, as this tends to fall off when cooking anyway, and also brush off any visible bits of dirt as well. And finally, with the oyster mushrooms, I am just cutting them from the main stalk. These mushrooms get very chewy towards the base, where they all join together. The ones I have here look very clean with no visible dirt, so nothing to remove there. Okay, that's great. All the mushrooms on the tray and all the trim and the dirty parts in the container. Now over to the sink. To wash these mushrooms, I'm placing them gently in a container and filling it with water until the mushrooms are floating above the bottom of the container. Luckily for us, mushrooms float and dirt tends to sink. Once you have a 3-finger width gap of water under your mushrooms, give them a gentle mix around to loosen any stuck on dirt and get it sinking to the bottom of the container. Mushrooms are like sponges, they absorb water like crazy, so they don't want to be in the water for too much time. Let's say no more than 1 minute, ideally around 30 seconds, before getting them back out of the water and onto a paper towel to drain off. Now we have these mushrooms draining off on some paper towel, we will just give them a little hand in drying a little further by gently patting some more paper towel on top, then going around each mushroom individually to absorb as much water as possible. This is one of these steps that may seem a little bit over the top, but will make a huge difference when we come to cook these mushrooms, so don't skip this step. Place them to one side for a few minutes to continue draining whilst we deal with the trim. With our trim, we will just run some water over them as well, leaving a gap underneath and leave them to sit in this water until we need them. Now, you want to preheat your oven to 220 Celsius, 430 Fahrenheit. The mushrooms have been draining off for a few minutes and now we are going to slice them. I'm starting with the creminis. I'm cutting them into roughly 5mm thick slices. We don't want these too thick or too thin. I'm getting 8 to 10 slices per mushroom. Place them on a plate or a tray, whatever you have, and onto the shiitakes, possibly my favourite mushrooms ever because of their fantastic flavour and texture. With these, I'm slicing them a little thicker than the creminis, around 8mm or 1/4 of an inch, no thicker than 1 centimetre or 1/3 of an inch. Do your best to keep the stalk intact. They have this beautiful shape when sliced and are going to be a presentation piece for our risotto. Place them onto the same plate or tray as the creminis and we'll move on to the oyster mushrooms. Get a sheet tray. I have the same one as I drained the mushrooms on. I've just dried it off and I'm going to pull the oyster mushrooms apart into roughly little finger-sized pieces. I know everyone's little fingers are different sizes, so just go with your size. Pull out any remaining tough, stalky bits. You'll be able to feel the difference by giving them a squeeze with your fingers. Put these over with the rest of the trim that's soaking in the water. Drizzle them with a little extra virgin olive oil. Give them a good but gentle mix so everyone is coated in oil. This is an important step. Don't skip it or do a half-assed job. Get your hands in there. Notice I've added no salt. This will make the mushrooms not crisp up like we want them to. Into the preheated oven for 10 minutes or until they start getting crispy and golden brown. Back to the trim. It's been soaking in the water for 10 minutes or so and I've got a 1.5 litre or 1.5 quart saucepan. I'm just going to remove the very bottoms of the stalks if they are really dirty and scrape off any dirty looking bits with my paring knife. The bits I'm happy with are going into the saucepan and I'm just cutting or pulling them apart into smaller pieces. Now I'm going to add 1 litre of vegetable stock. This could also be chicken stock, but I prefer the flavour of vegetable for this dish. If you want a recipe for this stock, I'll leave a link in the description. If you're going to use a packet stock, which is fine, I recommend going with half the amount that the label recommends. Otherwise, the risotto could end up being too salty with the other ingredients. Over to the stove and onto a low heat so that the mushroom trim starts to infuse into the stock. The oyster mushrooms have been roasting in the oven for 10 minutes and have started to get crispy and golden brown around the edges, so I'm going to flip them all over. Some may be a little stuck to the tray and you may be asking yourself, why is he not using baking paper? You will find out soon. Just do your best to unstick the stuck ones and don't worry, as we want some of that mushroom to stay stuck to the tray. Back into the oven for 5 to 10 minutes or until evenly golden brown. This next bit's important, choosing the right pan to cook your risotto in. I'm going with this saucepan that is 23 centimeters or 9 inches in diameter. You want something that's wide, otherwise you have to stir too much and you end up with a mushy risotto. Place the pan onto a high heat and add around 2 tablespoons of olive oil. Let this heat up until the oil starts shimmering. Then add all of your cremini mushrooms. They should start sizzling straight away. Don't stir them for the first 2 minutes, just let them sit there and form a crust. You'll want to, but just resist the temptation. After 2 minutes, give them a gentle stir so you don't break them up too much, and continue to cook for another 1 to 2 minutes. After that, your mushroom should have shrunk in size and be golden brown in parts. Notice once again, no salt, for the same reason as before. These are ready to come out of the pan and onto a plate or a tray to cool down. Get as much of the loose mushroom out of the pan as possible. Back onto the high heat and add a little more oil if you think it's needed. In go the shiitakes. Move them a little so they are in contact with the bottom of the pan as much as possible. Shiitakes have less water content than cremini, so this will have to be a quicker cook, otherwise they may burn. Then after around 1 minute, give them a gentle stir and continue to cook for another minute until they look like this. Then out of the pan and onto the same plate or tray to cool down with the creminis. Now we have this caramelized brown fond on the bottom of the pan. Pure flavour for our risotto. Let this pan cool down, ready for the next step. Talking of caramelized pure flavour, the oyster mushrooms are ready. They are super crispy and evenly golden brown. Some may be stuck to the tray, like this. Just remove as many as possible and put them to one side to cool. Then bring the tray over to the stock that's heating on the stove and pour a little stock into the tray. And go to town, scraping off all the stuck-on caramelized bits with a wooden spoon or a silicone spatula. Don't use metal on metal, this can give a metallic taste. Once you're happy you have all the caramelized bits removed, pour the liquid back into the stock. This is packed full of delicious roasted umami flavours that we have just got for free. In the end, your tray should look like this. And now, the colour of this stock has really deepened, but we've lost a little volume through evaporation, so I'm going to top mine back up to the 1 litre mark. The saucepan I cooked the mushrooms in has cooled down and I'm putting it back onto a low heat and adding 1 medium-sized finely chopped shallot. To prepare this shallot, I've cut it in half from top to tail, peeled off the papery skin and the first layer of flesh, sliced in the same direction as the lines of the shallot but kept the root on so everything stays together, then sliced horizontally into the shallot twice. This really helps to get everything finely chopped. Don't worry if any bits fall out at this point. Then held everything together with my left hand and gradually started to slice across the shallot, resulting in a nice fine dice. Back to the pan and I'm adding a pinch of salt to the shallots and a drizzle of olive oil. Then I'm cooking these on a low heat for around a minute or until they have started to soften and turn slightly translucent. Be careful, shallots burn very easily, so don't take your eye off them. After 1 minute of cooking, in goes a finely diced stick of celery. To prepare the celery, I cut it into 3 equal lengths to make it more manageable, then cut those lengths into thick matchsticks, then cut across those to get this fine dice. Back to the pan and everything has softened and the fond we had in the bottom of the pan has mostly lifted off thanks to the gentle cooking of the vegetables. Keeping the pan on low, in goes 200 grams or 1 cup of rice. I'm using Aborio rice. This is the rice I use most of the time. Carnaroli rice is also a good option. I'm just going to gently toast this rice in the pan for 2 minutes, stirring occasionally so nothing burns. Then in goes 1 small glass of dry white wine. My rule with cooking with wine is you should have to be willing to drink it to cook with it. Cook 80% of the liquid away while stirring. This won't take long. Now I will start adding the stock. I'm going to add the stock in 4 stages, so that means roughly 250 mils or 1 cup each time. Stirring occasionally so nothing sticks to the bottom of the pan. Do this gently so you don't break any of the grains of rice. This would make the risotto mushy, and keep the risotto at a gentle simmer. After 2 more additions of stock, 3 in total, gentle simmering and gentle stirring every couple of minutes, the grains of rice have swollen and everything's generally starting to resemble a risotto. It's time for the final stage of cooking. I've put the shiitake mushrooms onto a sheet tray so I can warm them up in the oven, and the cremini and oyster mushrooms are going into the risotto. I'm going to add the remaining stock to the rice and then add the cremini mushrooms and add the oyster mushrooms. Then, once again, gently stir everything together and continue to gently simmer for around 2 minutes or until the centre of the grain of rice looks like this, with a small amount of pure white in the very centre. Now, turn the heat off and place a lid on the pan and leave this to sit for 10 minutes so the rice finishes cooking really slowly, and you guessed it, gently. After 10 minutes of patiently waiting, the rice has taken on some of the colour of the mushrooms and absorbed all of the excess liquid from the pan. Aborio rice is thirsty and it soaks up whatever liquid you give it, so I'm going to add around another 50 ml shot of hot water. This could also be stock if you had any left over, and I'm going to give that a gentle stir, and the consistency looks good, just a little looser than we want it on the plate. In goes 50 grams or roughly a cup of parmesan. I just put this parmesan through my microplane to get super fine shavings. You don't want thick gratings of parmesan for this dish as it won't melt in properly. Stir that in gently as well so everything's incorporated. Now it's the time you've been waiting for, time to taste for seasoning. Mine needs some salt, but that may not be the case for you, especially if you have used a packet stock. So taste 3 times if you have to and get it right. You can always add, but you cannot take away, and it would be such a shame to over-season at this point. Finally, onto the plating. I'm using this bowl plate, which I really like, but traditionally risotto is served on just a normal flat plate. See how it's just settling down as I spoon it in? If yours is holding its position, then you need to add a dash more liquid. A few gentle taps to get it spread around a little. The shiitakes have been warming, not cooking, in the residual heat of the oven. If your oven is cold by this point, then turn it on as low as it will go, to just warm these mushrooms through. I'm arranging some on top for a form of decoration, and more importantly, they are going to give another texture to this dish. And that's us finished. As always, the ingredient and equipment lists are in the description below, and I've also left a link to the vegetable stock recipe there as well.
Alright guys, and that's that. I really hope you go make this one soon. Go check out one of my other videos, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Bye.